Who is John Ternus? Only the coolest and youngest executive to be at Apple in recent years, even though he's been there since 2001. He has been all over the news for the past 24 hours. If we look at Google, but first of all, today we are greeted with the executive producer, Kika, who is overseeing productions today, which is cool. But anyway, if we look at Google, I just typed in John Ternus Apple, and all I see is headline after headline. CEO, Apple's next CEO, possible CEO, who's after Tim Cook, CEO, like, man, he is all over this thing. And if you don't know who he is, let me bring you up to speed. He is the Senior Vice President of Hardware Engineering at Apple. He's charismatic. I've seen him in these interviews. Most of the time he's with Jaws, who's the Senior Vice President for Marketing. He's always cool and collected. He's always good with his responses. Sometimes he's even witty, much like Craig. And like overall, he's just a really good face for the company currently. In recent year, products under his watch would be the Mac, the iPhone, iPad. Everything substantial to the hardware over the last few years, like 2019, 2020, has been because of him. He oversaw the transition to the Apple Silicon M chips for the Mac. He has made all these improvements to hardware since taking over as SVP for hardware engineering. And honestly, everything that I've loved about Apple for the last 5-ish years has directly been because of John. Okay, but now let's take a step back and actually assess this situation as a whole, because it is kind of weird for me. I went to school for business, and so I kind of like understand like the corporate structure and all that. And though not technically law of the land or general rule of how things run, most of the time the successor to the sitting CEO would be the COO, the Chief Operations Officer. Tim Cook was Steve Jobs' COO, so people were expecting him to take Steve's place inevitably, and he did. And Jeff Williams is the current COO for Apple. Now, when it comes to like keynotes or anything like that, we've normally seen him be the guy who introduces the Apple Watch every time. But to have someone kind of go outside of the vertical line of leadership to come in as CEO is kind of unusual for Apple. But then again, Apple plays by their own rules. See, for me personally, Craig Federighi is the fan favorite. I mean, he's mine. I coined the term Craig sexual a long time ago.
Let's set the mood.
You touch and go, but don't you know?
How cool is that?
He just looks like he's always having a lot of fun. And much like John, he is very charismatic.
I don't know anything about what you're talking about.
And there's like this aura around him that's like enticing, that you want to listen to what he has to say, which is good for a leader. But funny enough, during the interviews, he would always deny the proposition of him becoming the next CEO. He would say that's a terrible mistake, not interested. And I always thought he was kind of playing coy.
Insanity. Yeah, no, that would be irresponsible.
But anyway, for years, Craig was like the favorite. If it wasn't Johnny Ive because of his charismatic British accent, then you want the fun energy of Craig. But neither of those two technically necessitate that being a good leader. In fact, some have made the case that some of Apple's shortcomings fall under Craig's jurisdiction, much like iPadOS, because he is the Senior Vice President for Software Engineering. Admittedly, if it's between either of those two guys, Craig or John, I like both of them personally. Now let's talk about Steve Jobs for a second. Steve was a marketing genius, and he had always drooled over designs with Johnny Ive. Looking back at it, I would say he preferred hardware over software, since he was always so strict about what iOS could do back in the day. But we would always see all this passion and all these new product categories that he would introduce. Whether it was the first iMac, or then the iPod, iPhone, iPad, this, that. I know what he's about. That was stupid. But we all drooled over that with him because we believed in it. We believed in him. And now I would say, looking back at it, that I started to believe in the hardware again after we started to see the rollout of the M-chip MacBooks. And I've loved all the new iPhones since 2020, like the beloved iPhone mini gone too soon, which was so reminiscent of the iPhone 4 and 5, my personal favorite. And I've been on board with all the new hardware upgrades that have been coming to the new iPads. And lastly, I love the design of these new Apple Watches. From Series 7 forward, and those industrial Ultras. So now I'm left to ask, is this Steve Jobs 2.0? The modern day hardware guru? We needed Tim Cook for the last decade. We needed our contrast to Steve Jobs after losing him so soon. And Tim has gotten Apple through some hard times, especially during the early years when everybody was doubting him. And now it's fair to say nobody's questioning his leadership ability. So whoever he appoints to replace him next, maybe that will be his greatest achievement yet. And if it's John Ternus, I welcome it.